Joining me today for the show, I'm very excited to have the author of the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Dr. Joy DeGruy, who I'll introduce to you shortly. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome was the book of the week from last week, and I'm very happy to get to have her on the show, the author of the book, to discuss the book and related issues as well. So let me tell you a bit about Dr. DeGruy. Dr. Joy Angela DeGruy holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Communication, a Master's degree in Social Work, a Master's degree in Clinical Psychology, and a PhD in Social Work Research. Dr. DeGruy is a nationally and internationally renowned researcher and educator. For over 2 decades, she served as an assistant professor at Portland State University School of Social Work and now serves as president and chief executive officer of Dr. Joy DeGruy Publications, Inc. Dr. DeGruy's research focuses on the intersection of racism, trauma, violence, and American chattel slavery. She has over 30 years of practical experience as a professional in the field of social work. She conducts workshops and trainings in the areas of intergenerational historical trauma, mental health, social justice, improvement strategies, and evidence-based model development. Dr. DeGruy has published numerous refereed journal articles and authored her seminal book that we'll talk about today, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. She has developed the African American Male Adolescent Respect Scale, an assessment instrument designed to broaden our understanding of the challenges facing these youth in an effort to prevent their representation in the criminal justice system. Dr. DeGruy, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And also, I should say thank you to your nephew, Jamal, who made it possible for me to connect with you. So thank you so much for taking the time to discuss your book, which I read and thoroughly enjoyed. Of course, when I say enjoyed, also at times, you get saddened by some of the things that you do read in your book, because that's the reality of America and American history and what has happened in this country. But your book, of course, outlines what has happened, but also has hope for the future. But I will let you share post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is this concept or syndrome that you have developed based on your research and experience and study. Maybe you could share with us what that entails. I know that's a big question, but maybe we can start there.
Again, it's exactly what it sounds like, actually. It's looking at intergenerational trauma, which is an area of study and research that's not new. It's been, we've been looking at multiple generations of folks that have experienced trauma. We've looked at victims of, for example, natural disaster. We've looked at victims of human disasters, like what happened with Jewish Holocaust and what happened in Rwanda, and various spaces where human beings have behaved really horribly and committed genocide against folks like here, indigenous people in America. Well, I looked at the impact of American chattel slavery, which, of course, lasted over 300 years. So I made it my work, my focus, to really do a deep dive and to understand what are the implications of injury that happens as a result of that long-term and enduring trauma. And of course, this is coupled with phenomenal resilience, clearly, phenomenal skill and agency. However, it did and continues to leave an incredible stain on this country and upon the hearts and souls of people of color in general and African Americans specifically.
Yeah, and it's, of course, how could we not expect what has been the experience of African Americans here in the United States not to leave an impact in a variety of ways, which you outline in the book, some of those aspects of the syndrome which we might be able to dive into. And of course, the healing and the reconciliation hasn't happened. And I think near the end of today's conversation, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what you think of as the what could be that process of healing, reconciliation.
Absolutely.
And of course, that brings up the word reparations as well, which enters the conversation when we talk about these things. Looking at post-traumatic slave syndrome, I know you outline in the book quite well different aspects of it. And there's 3 categories that you present here about vacant esteem, ever-present anger, and racist socialization. Maybe we can outline some of those a bit. So vacant esteem, what is that, and how would you describe or define that? Hello?
Oh, oops, sorry.
Oh,
accidentally muted you.
That's sorry. That's in the Zoom world that happens a lot these days.
Exactly. So what I think when I look at vacant esteem, it's not your garden variety low self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, when I was doing my research and I was looking at 200 African American males ages 14 to roughly 20, 100 of whom were incarcerated, 100 that were not, I was looking at this whole idea of vacant esteem, but I didn't mean low self-esteem. And since nothing had been written in the literature that really spoke to what I was talking about when I said vacant esteem, of course, what I had to use were the existing scales, which were not appropriate. But anyway, when I say vacant esteem, I'm not talking about, oh my gosh, I feel bad because my brother can do more chin-ups than I can. That's your garden variety stuff. I'm talking about having been assaulted with your reality. In other words, having generations of people, not just anybody, but institutions, schools, medicine, law, media, all of them saying to you that you are not fully human. The dehumanizing piece of what has happened to African American people, where you are consistently being sent messages that you are not worthy, you're not whole. I mean, the Constitution, 3/5 human, the 3/5 compromise, all of these things over generations. And I, of course, illustrate that up to 2021. They put an African-American man, from the Congo in the Bronx Zoo in 1906 as an exhibit. I mean, these are what I'm trying to share here is what happens when you are consistently given these messages that you're not okay. It results in vacant esteem. And I mean that primary sense of self that fundamentally says that I am equal, on par, normal, healthy human being like everyone else. What does that do when one begins to internalize this? Now, the good news about that is the answer to this vacant esteem is something called racial socialization. Racial, deliberately imparting to people of color in general, African Americans specifically, of the beauty, grace, normalcy of their blackness, right? But that vacant esteem shows up in places where folks say things like, my gosh, she was sure pretty, even though she was dark. Now, this is an intracultural phenomenon. This is something that black people were saying. When I was a kid, they would call you, a name, but they call you black first. You black, and then fill in the blank. You black. And again, as a child, I struggle with that because I'm going, you are black. But the assumption here is that when I call you black, I'm somehow going to add to the insult and the injury. And so that vacant esteem piece deals with that stuff. It deals with the impact of racist socialization. It is the impact of racist socialization. And again, we know that we've been able to combat this and overcome this in a large way, but in some ways, those injuries remain, and those behaviors and self-denigrating kind of perceptions continue.
Right.
Persist.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's that very powerful concept, dehumanization, in any genocide, the things that you discussed earlier. It's part and parcel that there's dehumanization of this group that is being treated in that way to justify, to say that it's okay what we're doing. And if you look at the people who are promoting or supporting slavery and the way they talked about why it made it okay, even doing a favor. I mean, it's laughable wonderful but sad to see that it was, one of the arguments was it was actually helping the people who are enslaved because they liked it or they enjoyed it or was giving them some kind of benefit.
Of course,
yeah.
Of course.
And so
you have to remove any conscience with it. Of course, I can't feel like I've done something wrong.
Yeah, and what I always think is interesting when I read these types of writings of people supporting these things, and I try to keep that in mind even in the present day, is that sometimes the most immoral and horrible actions and ideas of human beings have been written in very intellectual and what would be the language intelligent ways by who was considered smart at that time, but they were morally bankrupt and so biased in their thinking. And we have to be aware of that even in present day, that sometimes people who might put things in very beautiful language as far as the types of words they choose are promoting the ugliest ideas imaginable. And so we see that when we look at slavery, and it of course doesn't just end, and you outline that history very well in the book, that it's not that 1865 everything is okay now because it's in the Constitution that no longer there's slavery, that those injuries continue, and of course do continue to the present day, as you outline in the book. And of course that dehumanization being so unfortunately accepted in the American culture, so to speak, of course is going to impact everyone involved. And as you said, to overcome that, you talk about how you kind of have to know what you've been through to know where you want to go, and that is very important.
And to understand, it's even more important to understand that this did not. I wrote a piece recently. It's called "Who's Under the Sheets Now," and it's about white supremacy, and it's talking about the fact that when you hear the word white supremacy, I think this has changed in recent times, but people would imagine this kind of horrible, hood wearing toothless wonder that's roaming about, but no. Who's under the sheets now wear judges' robes. They wear police uniforms. They're teachers. They're doctors. And you see it followed not just, these aren't just individuals. These are institutions. Because you have to remember, in order for slavery to have existed as long as it did, everyone had to be complicit.
Right.
Every major discipline had to sign off. Oh, yeah, this is okay. These people should be treated this way. They deserve this. To calm the consciences, to remove the cognitive dissonance that one would feel upon oppressing or subjugating an entire group of people.
Right.
So you have to realize that every major institution in America, this is why the work is important, because people go, oh, it's just those police officers. Oh, it's just those folks that were at the Capitol. But you see, it had to infiltrate and had to be a part of every institution. And this is why it's so difficult to eradicate, because it is almost, stamped into the DNA as it relates to folks have become so comfortable with, so normalized by this idea of superiority and inferiority that it is pervasive. And so when we look at it, we have to look at the whole thing. Right? So we look at repair, for example, right? When you're going to repair something, sometimes, just look at it from this kind of symbolic way, and I'm a person that does a lot of repair. I like putting things together and fixing things, and if I were to look at something that needs to repair, sometimes you just need to shore it up. You need to clean it up. Maybe there's some corrosion. Maybe you can give some support to an existing structure, and it'll be okay. Other times you say, oh, this part has to go.
Right.
And then other times the entire structure has to go because it's rotten from the root. Are you following me?
Yep.
So it becomes a situation where it's not a simple remedy, and saying you're sorry isn't enough. Taking down statues, and although that's important, changing names on sports teams and Aunt Jemima, that's all great. That's great. It's important, but it doesn't get to the root.
Right.
And it doesn't change a system. Like people say to me, Joy, how can we fix the system of law enforcement? I said, we can't. It's not broken. It's not broken. Policing does exactly what it's designed to do. The problem is we've never realized that it's always been designed to do what it does. Right. And if you understood the history of policing and slave patrols, then you understand why, in fact, black people are hunted. It is what the institution was born from. And so, again, our ignorance about the historical context that places us where we are is why it's so hard to get to, because people can't believe it. We none of us were educated in this way. I have 4 degrees. You named them, 3 advanced degrees. None of it taught me what you read in that book.
Yep.
None of it taught me that.
I went to school in this country from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and in history, the way that things like slavery were talked about is so passive, and I haven't learned, and I still have so much to learn, but until much after in my own research looking into what American history was really like, you don't get that. You get that sanitized view. And we have to go into commercial break, but even actually when you mentioned that, I think you did it really was interesting when you talked about visiting the Statue of Liberty and that experience there, that even the history of the Statue of Liberty, which is one of the most iconic American symbols that we have, we really don't know the whole story, or some very important parts of it are not talked about. Maybe we can start with that after the break, but also a lot more to explore. Again, my guest today is Dr. Joy DeGruy, author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Again, joining me on the show today is Dr. Joy DeGruy. We are discussing her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And before the break, Dr. DeGruy, I was mentioning your story sharing going to the Statue of Liberty and your experience there. And I want to get into that a bit because I think what's important, going back to this issue of healing, we of course want to talk about that aspect as well. But really, to heal something, you have to know the problem, the situation you're dealing with. As you mentioned, sometimes you have to shore things up.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is it audio?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was mentioning that, before the break you shared about fixing something, and sometimes you have to shore it up. You have to sometimes take off a piece. Sometimes you have to build it from the root. But until we can't fix a problem until we know the problem and really understand it. And so that's part of something you hear a lot these days. Okay, we've talked about slavery, or it happened in the past, and people don't want to face it. But until we understand what happened, I don't think, of course, we'll be able to fix any problem, including something as big as the wounds that have happened as part of American history. So, when you went to the Statue of Liberty, I thought it was interesting you shared about the chains that are at Lady Liberty's feet, which are hard to see, actually, unless you have specific angles. And even you shared your experience and how you actually ended up working for I forgot if it's called the Parks Department or what it is, to make that more part of the visit, or understandable for people to know why those chains are at her feet. I don't know if you want to share a bit about that.
Sure. So what happened was I think it was 2007 or 2008, a friend of mine, Floyd Myers, really dear friend, got a job for the department. He was working for the Department of the Interior. He lives in New York, and he was over all of the parks in the state of New York. And so he called me and he said, Joy, I want you to come to the Statue of Liberty, and I can get you a pass. And I said, oh no. He said, why? I said, because it's going to make me mad, Floyd. I'm not going. It's going to make me mad. He goes, what do you mean? I said, no, Floyd. I'm not going. I know it's going to make me mad. He goes, come on. You can go up in her eye and everything. So I said, okay. And the reason why I had said no was because I had been to France. I'd actually seen Bartholdi's original drawings of the Statue of Liberty. And in the drawings, right now, as a matter of fact, if you ask anybody, what is the Statue of Liberty holding in her left hand? Her right hand, of course, she has the torch. But what is in her left hand? And what it is in her left hand, people go, well, I don't know, it's a Bible. Nope, it's not a Bible. Oh, it's a scroll. Nope, it's not a scroll. Actually, they don't know what it is. Even at the Statue of Liberty, it's just a rectangular thing with a Roman numeral on it. So what she was holding, however, originally, in the drawing of Bartholdi, who was the sculptor, were broken chains. Now, this was commissioned in 1865, which makes sense, right? We're looking at really celebrating. She is the Statue of Liberty. And the broken chains are about freedom, right? It's just do the math. It's real simple. Yep. But the United States said, no, we don't want those chains. We don't want them, of course, for every reason in the world. But Bartholdi was insistent. He was really insistent that the chains remain. And I often say that the biggest problems in America are because of the pathology of denial, the pathology of having things hidden in plain sight, right? So the whole idea was they didn't want to show the chains. They didn't want any chains at all, as a matter of fact. And until 2008, I actually had a rather intense confrontation with a couple of the Rangers who were very, very defensive, because the chains actually have always been there. But they are not hard to see. They're impossible to see, because they are at her feet. She's on a pedestal. You can't see them from below. If you're inside, you can't see them from inside. So they're hidden in plain sight. And so I felt some kind of way about that, right? So I did a little deeper digging and realized that Bartholdi was a sympathizer with the abolitionist movement. I mean, I'm learning all these different things. And so I speak to Floyd, my friend's boss. I don't want to get Floyd in trouble. He just got the job. I can't create a problem for my friend. So he said, "No, Joy, I'm with you. I'm with you all the way." So we talked to his boss, and his boss said, "Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, nope, not going to do anything about it." I said, "Listen, here's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to pay to have, maybe a local black artist in New York sculpt just that part and put it on display, because they show you everything in the world about the Statue of Liberty. They cut it in half. They let you know how thick it is. They tell you it turned green because it was coppered, it oxidized. I mean, they tell you more than you ever want to know. And they show you every single aspect of the Statue of Liberty on the tour except her feet." So now what's interesting, I said, okay, and I'll even get a sculptor. I said, I will pay myself to have a picture, a photo of it. Oh, I'm saying all this. His boss says no. I said, okay. So I started telling on him everywhere. I travel all over the world. At the time, pre-COVID, I was, of course, traveling all over the world, and I was telling this very story and showing the pictures, right, of the chains that are not shown and are not on the tour. So I get a call from the Department of the Interior. And this time it's Floyd's boss, and I guess he's his boss's boss, whoever these folks were. They call me and they say, "We'd like to speak with you." So they fly me to New York. They apologize, say we've been negligent, and we're going to correct this. And the first thing we want you to do is train all of our Rangers, which I did. And now the chains. Now this was I think 2013, 2014, because I went back 3 times, because I didn't trust just because they said they were going to change something they weren't. I just got to keep them honest. So I went back, and the chains, they have a picture of it on display, and I was really pleased as pie. I really was. Oh my goodness, we've arrived, all is good in the world, and something rather spectacular happened. And I'm actually going to read exactly what it says. So not only did they put the chains on display, I went undercover to see if the Rangers would talk about the chains. You see, once you show the chains, you have to that's part of the reason they want to show them. Because now you have to explain what they mean. Yep. And I thought, look, are they going to do this unasked? So I have a picture of me with the Ranger. He explained the whole thing unasked. But what was most spectacular was what emerged May 23rd, 2019, Washington Post. The Statue of Liberty was created to celebrate freed slaves, not immigrants. Its new museum recounts. Lady Liberty was inspired by the end of the Civil War and emancipation. The connection to immigration came later. Lady Liberty was originally designed to celebrate the end of slavery, not the arrival of immigrants. Ellis Island, the inspection station through which millions of immigrants passed, didn't open until 6 years after the statue was unveiled in 1886. The plaque with the famous Emma Lazarus poem, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," wasn't added until 1903. So now if you look at this article, there's a whole new museum, right? And they're saying it was never about immigrants. It was always about freed slaves. Stay with me. Now here's my question to you and your audience. I would love to believe that Dr. Joy, it uncovered this. But do you think they didn't know this already? Right. Of course they knew. Of course they knew. And this is why we cannot, again, embark on this belief that we have a true accounting of history. Whose narrative are we reading and writing about? And so again, here this is something, again, the most recognized probably symbol throughout the world is the Statue of Liberty, and we've been ignorant about the whole purpose of it being created. So by the way, I did find the picture in the Statue of Liberty. I found the original drawing. It was in the basement of the Statue of Liberty in 2007, hidden in encased in glass behind figurines facing a wall in a hallway. That's what the picture was. Now, I was looking for it because I knew it was a historical document that it had to be there. But now it's prominently displayed because now they've told the truth, you see. And so, again, it's not that they didn't know.
Of course.
It was, and it's always the secrets that make us sick. It's always the secrets. And so you know that as a therapist. I know that it's no matter what the presenting problem is, ultimately it's that secret.
Yeah.
And it comes out somewhere that's still hurting the individual or the family, the group. So again, it was an amazing journey for me that lasted from 2007 until 2019.
Wow.
May 23rd.
Yeah, and I have to actually go look at that article. In the book, you shared a bit about how you were then, asked to train the people who were giving the tours and all the rangers. Yeah, but I think it is such a perfect encapsulation of the United States in so many ways that let's just look at the Statue of Liberty and how it's about American greatness and how beautiful it is, but let's not think about the bad parts that are actually the part of our history that's really part of that symbol as well. Let's just look at what we want to look at, and let's not look at those chains. But what I think is also important is we want to talk more about healing and what it's going to take from all of us, but you actually took the action to make that happen. As you said, of course they knew the history, that you didn't uncover something brand new. It was there but covered, but you brought it out and made it so that they couldn't ignore it anymore, which is I think a lot of what's going on right now, and we're still in that process of trying to uncover the history and all the present injustices that continue in the United States to make sure we have to look at it. And we talked about this on the break, that being therapists, we work with individuals and couples and families, and you mentioned secrets or some wrongdoing also that happened years ago that can damage a relationship, and it will never recover or be as healthy, as strong as it could be. And of course, if we look at the relationship between the United States and its black citizens, so many wrongs have been done for hundreds of years, and I think you emphasize that in talks. I've heard you say that we're not just talking about 10 years, 20 years, we're saying hundreds of years, 300 plus years of slavery, and then after that even more wrongdoing in different ways. How can we assume in any way it's possible for America to be the healthy, happy, united states where we're all united and together until we reconcile, recognize, acknowledge, and apologize for the wrongdoings that have happened in this country? I think it's really impossible to see a resolution without that happening.
Absolutely correct. And I often during COVID, I've been zoomed out, as you no doubt are. Just zoomed out. I'm beginning to feel like I'm becoming a part of my chair in my office. I'm just, we're molding ourselves together. But one of the things that comes up often when we talk about this is, again, people look at it as historical, but it's what followed slavery. What I have to always help people understand. I have a slide in my presentation that says, after 1865, where did slavery go? Right? Because people have this kind of mythology around balanced playing field, everything's leveled, everybody's fine, right? But literally, the oppressive policies that were put in place, Jim Crow, 4,400 lynchings, that's just the ones we got names for. Those are the folks we have names for. 4,400 people. This is after slavery, right? And we're talking about Jim Crow laws and burning whole cities to the ground of prosperous black cities like Greenwood. We're looking at continued oppression, police use of deadly force. We're looking at all of these different things that continue to occur up to 2021. So there's, again, I don't know why we hold to this myth that that's all in the past. Right. But I wanted to, because there's often a person that says, well, I wasn't there. I didn't do it. Why are you talking about that? Get over it. All these different things that people will say to black folks, right? They'll say this to black people. And I want to read this short statement taken from the book Cass by Isabel Wilkerson. If you have not read her book Cass, please do. She's phenomenal, and her book is phenomenal, as well as The War of the Other Sons. And I named this piece, This House. And I don't know if anyone has captured the sentiments of America the way she has here and really put to rest some of these very strange ideas. We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves. And yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it. But here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands. Unaddressed, the ruptures and diagonal cracks will not fix themselves. The toxins will not go away, but rather will spread, leach, and mutate as they already have. When people live in an old house, they come to adjust to the idiosyncrasies and outright dangers skulking in an old structure. They put buckets under a wet ceiling, prop up groaning floors, learn to step over that rotting wood tread in the staircase. The awkward becomes acceptable, and the unacceptable becomes merely inconvenient. Live with it long enough, and the unthinkable becomes normal. And exposed over generations, we learn to believe that the incomprehensible is the way that life is supposed to be.
Wow.
Again, this is the house we've inherited. This is the house we have inherited. And I think that the answers when you talk about healing, again, first it is to know, and then it is to do. We can't even hope to deal with this reality if we are afraid to look at it. As you know, the road to recovery has to come with a proper diagnosis of whatever the ill is. And once we have that diagnosis, then we have to look at the remedies that are necessary. And in this case, we're talking about not just remedying the assault on the personage, on the intrinsic value and beauty and nobility of a people. It's not just that. It's not just saying you're sorry, but to create a system that is just, to correct for the injustices that have happened. You break my leg and then you complain that I limp. And then you charge me to fix the bruise, right? So it's amazing when we start looking at the extent to which people continue to benefit on the suffering of others that have been imposed on them. So it's not just, I'm sorry. You know, there has to be a reparations. And this, again, has, there's precedence for reparations. Other groups have received reparations. It's not like this is new either. But not Africans, not black people, not black people who are the descendants of those who were enslaved that have been, relegated to positions of being impoverished and poor health. All of these point to this legacy of injustice. And so when we start talking about reparations, again, that's where the rubber meets the road. Right. That's where we start saying, and I want to tell this story because this is such a really good illustration of justice in children. So these are children. I was asked, this was many years ago, to do a training. It was like, during Be Kind to Negroes Month, and people, and I don't do that. I mean, I actually don't go and become the the special Negro that people pick up and say, oh, here, I don't do that. I go, you got to find somebody else to do that. I don't do talks, but I will work with children, and I will work with youth. This is something that I've committed myself to because they may not know better, but big people, they should know better. And so I get this call from a friend of mine on the coast of Oregon coast. And he's, I think, he was a pastor of the church, a really unique man. He said, listen, Joy, I was wondering if you come and talk to some youth about Martin Luther King and, justice, him being a drum major for justice. That's the theme of our camp or whatever. I said, okay. So I said, it'd be nice. I'd be on the coast, hang out. So I go to the coast. I have my, my computer. I have my, all my little papers and all this stuff. And I walk into a room of 3 to 6 year olds. Literally. All of them, they're 3 to 6 year olds. I couldn't believe they're all sitting on the rug, their little legs folded, throwing spitballs and such. And I'm like, what? right? So I put my little computer away, and I'm going, okay, this is when you got to think on your feet. So I look at all these, whole little room full of them, and I said, would anybody like to do a little skit? You know, we'll put together some, and everybody, I do, all the little hands raised. So I picked two little girls, blonde hair, blue-eyed little girls, and they say, I want to do it. So I take them up, and I say, all right, I'm going to be the teacher, and I whisper to them what they're going to do. So one of them, they're both seated at desks, facing all the little kids sitting on the floor. And one of them has a crayon, and one of them has a toy. And they're, one's playing with a toy, the other was, drawing something. And I am the teacher. I have my back to them. I'm at my desk. Mm-hmm. And the little girl that has the crayon gets up and leaves. And when she gets up and leaves, the little girl with the toy takes her crayon. Mm. So when the little girl gets back, she realizes the girl's taking her crayon. So she taps me on the shoulder. She goes, teacher, she took my crayon. I said, she did. So I get up, and I asked the little girl with the toy, and had her stand up. I said, did you take her crayon? And the little girl goes, yes. I said, say you're sorry. She goes, oh, I'm sorry. I said, okay. So I turned around, sat at my desk, and the two little girls went and sat back down. Mm-hmm. And so the little kids in the audience started screaming, no, raising their hands. I'm going, what's wrong? Let's do it again. So I said, did you take her crayon? Yeah. Are you sorry? I'm sorry. And then I had them both go sit down. And the little bitty one in the front, little bitty one, maybe 3 or 4 years old, raised her hand. I said, well, what's the problem? She goes, she got to get back that crayon. Mm-hmm. Oh. No. You got to get, this is not going to be okay till she gives her that crayon back. Now, that's a 3-year-old. They can figure that out, right? Yep. And so when we start looking at justice, we start talking about healing. Healing can't happen in a little room with somebody talking softly to you twice a week. That's not what we're talking about. And when you look at the African American experience, that may be necessary for some, but what we need is justice. Right. Let's be clear. There has to be justice here, economic justice. In terms of help and healing in every discipline, that justice has to happen. Being denied rights to buy homes, the GI Bill. I mean, it goes all the way back. We've been denied all of those rights. Yep. And we got to make that right so that we can have sustainable communities, so that we can continue a trajectory of continual improvement and advancement, which we're doing in spite of it, struggling, but that has to be made right. Yeah. And so there's this kind of sense of we can all talk about it, sing kumbaya and be good. No, this requires structural change. This requires policy change. And my last statement here is it requires vetting, which has also been something that has precedence. You saw what happened at the Capitol, right? Mm-hmm. And you remember when the inauguration was getting ready to happen, these senators said, oh, wait a minute, we need to take a look at these armed guards, the National Guard. And we need to vet them to make certain they're not among those that would do us harm. You following me? Mm-hmm. So they knew, let's vet them, and then found some of them. 12 of them, and eliminated them because they're direct ties with white supremacy or illegal activities. So you saw clear enough to take care of yourself, but you don't see clear enough that we need to vet every police officer in American cities. You can be a police officer, but not if you have the same kind of problems we saw at the Capitol. You don't get to come in the neighborhoods of color. That seems pretty straightforward and simple to me. Teachers, same thing. Because you have teachers that hate black children. And not all of them are white teachers. Some of them look just like us, because that gets back to that other issue that we were talking about earlier, right? And so what I'm saying is the answers are, the injury occurred on multiple levels. So the healing has to occur on multiple levels, including structural, economic, change.
Yep. And I think, we're actually way over the break, but I didn't want to stop you there. But I think you're right. We're not going to make something right. Saying, acknowledging and apologizing is the first step, but until you make the changes, it's not going to be reconciled, whether we're talking about it in a relationship between two people, or in this case, when we're talking about a whole group of people that have been wronged.
Give me my crayon back.
And we can talk after the break about what that crayon is going to entail. How are we going to give that crayon back to the black community of the United States, and what everyone can do to be a part of that process. So I'm with Dr. Joy DeGruy. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest today, Dr. Joy DeGruy, author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And before the break, Dr. DeGruy, you were sharing the story about these young children and a demonstration you did with them, showing them that just saying sorry is not right. You know, you have to give back that crayon if you stole that crayon from them. And that's a very simple answer, and what we have to deal with here in the United States to reconcile all the wrongs, it's going to be much more complicated than that, but we must do it. And I wanted to hear some of your thoughts. You shared some of them before the break of some of the things we need to make right. But what do you see as this path towards reparations that we sometimes hear about? And also, what can everyone do? Because I think a lot of people think, well, as long as I'm not part of the problem and I'm not racist, then I'm okay. So maybe if you could share some of your thoughts. I know those are some big questions, but I wanted to hear what you think about that.
Sure. I think many folks that are very much in the forefront of the reparations movement, are pointing out the structures and institutions within America that have been built on the backs of slaves and slavery in this country, or huge respected institution like Johns Hopkins University, Harvard, Yale, the major Ivy Leagues. When you start looking at how they were built and what funded their ability to do that, insurance companies, the money was there. I mean, tons and tons of money that was generated based on unpaid labor. And given that fact, there's no reason in the world why there are not communities of color are not prospering. Again, we've never been able to prosper, not because we haven't worked as hard as everybody else, not because we didn't have the capacity, but we were denied. We were denied loans. We were denied all of the things necessary to make our community sustainable. And when we did, they were burnt to the ground. I mean, all of these suggest that number one, education. For 300 years, it was illegal to read and write. Right? These institutions that have made money have built themselves on the back of slavery and then denied entrance. Right? Again, all these years. And I'm saying, so I believe education is very clear that I think every black man, woman, and child should not ever be denied education into any institution they want to go to, including the Ivy Leagues as well as the historically black colleges. That should be just, to me, upfront clear, that education, because that was just a clear demarcation line that we were denied. Then we're looking at, again, economic sustainability. When we start looking at what's happening in communities of color throughout the United States, every major city in the United States, people say, well, we don't have segregation. We don't? We don't. I bet you can walk into any community and say, where's the black community? In other words, where have the black people been marginalized to live? Where are the places that have the lowest tax revenue here, and where people don't have the ability to support businesses? And every city, even though we pride ourselves on being, we've no longer have segregation. We absolutely have segregation. And again, these things are glaring. Healthcare. Yeah. I mean, you name it. Every major institution. Yep. We have to begin to look. And as an individual, it's really interesting. My sister-in-law, Kathleen Cross, there's a video that went viral. We were shocked out of our minds that it went viral. But it's called Trip to the Grocery Store, where I tell the story of Kathleen, who's half black, half white, but looks white, and what she does in this grocery store. And it's amazing. At least 40 million people have seen this video. And we figured out that what it did, because Kathleen actually intervened when I and myself and my daughter, we're related, but nobody knew that. She looked like just an arbitrary white woman, but she was, we were all together in the store, and I was treated clearly differently than she was treated. I was asked for ID. People were looking up, my license to see if I had written bad checks. And Kathleen stepped over and confronted the cashier who was taking me through this. The manager came over. She changed the whole situation because she was a white face, and they saw another white face looking back. So she understood she had white privilege, even though she was half black. And so what that did, it went viral because I think there's so many people that say, my God, there's something I can do. And if you think about it, it was really interesting, and I really believe it had something to do with it. Well, we had matter of fact, there's something called the Karen Act. These are white women behaving badly, right? So the Karen Act, which has been submitted in California, where, there is some teeth behind your bad behavior. You're going to go to jail or be fined, or both. But what was amazing about if you think back to all of the Karens that we've seen that have been publicized, it's been a white woman often that confronts them. It's really interesting, but you have all of these white people that are saying, wait a minute, you didn't do anything wrong. No, leaning in, using their white privilege. There's always something you can do. There's always, whatever lane you're in, wherever you are, I don't care if you don't work. I don't care where you are. There's something you can do. If you have the power of hiring people, then be just and be fair and be equitable in your hiring. If you're someone that is a teacher, then you make certain that each student is treated with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter what lane you're in. The repair has to happen. This is hard work. Now, of course, on the one end, whether you like me or not, it is not relevant to me at this point. You don't have to like me, but I insist that you treat me with respect and dignity and justice. I insist upon that. If you can move further, then move it into your heart and understand that as a humanity, we lose our humanity. All of us do. None of us are free if any of us are not free. None of us are well if all of us can't be well. We've got to recognize, even with COVID, we're still seeing the disparity in the treatment, even in the access to care. All of those things continue. So for me, I think when we talk about reparations, we talk about structural institutional policy change. That's the big C. But then we have to look at change in our own individual lives. A really good friend of mine, Ruha Benjamin, made a statement that just really touched me, and I carry it with me everywhere. She said, as a child, if you've ever seen black people on the street, and black people walking down the street, and all of a sudden you'll see them nod to each other. They'll nod, right? Perfect strangers. They'll nod. It's an acknowledgement that I see you. And she talked about being a little girl. And she started crying when she told the story. She started crying, she said, because there were perfect strangers that were beaming love to me. They were beaming love to me. They didn't even know me, but they beamed love to me. And it warmed my heart as a child. It warms our hearts as adults. To beam love, we have the ability to do that. It's a decision. It's a choice. And so when I say to people, this change has to happen one way or another, whether you like me, it helps we know and recognize our intrinsic oneness as human beings. It helps if we see our humanity in each other. It helps even more if we can love each other. This doesn't become hard if we can love each other. But all that whole spectrum of things I just said need to happen for repair to happen. And everyone is capable of it.
Everyone is capable of it, and everyone needs to play a part in it. It's not going to happen just by a few people taking actions, and the actions are many, and the solutions, I think it obviously will take time, but that should never be a reason not to make things right. And I know I would want to talk to you forever, but I know I wanted to let you go at the hour mark, so I'll stop things there. But I wanted to thank you first for writing this book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and all the work that you do, but also for taking the time to come on my show today. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. We'll be in touch. Take care. That was Dr. Joy DeGruy, author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. A big thank you to her for joining me today. Let's go to another commercial break. We'll be right back.